Welcome everyone to Essentials of Automations. This is our third part in the series, Exploring Attributes and Automation Parameters. Today I'm joined by our three lovely panelists. I will hand things over to Bailey to introduce herself.
Hey everyone, I'm Bailey and I work on our FME Flow technical support team. You can find me in the community and also handling support cases amongst other things. And I'll pass it over to Tim.
Yep. Hi everyone, I'm Tim, and just like Bailey, I'm on the FME Flow technical support team. I'll pass it over to Kate.
Hey everyone, thanks Tim. I'm Kate. I'm also on the FME Flow technical support team. I lead the team that Bailey and Tim are on. So yeah, same thing. You can find us in the community, doing these webinars, trainings, cases, all over the place. So happy to be here today.
Excellent. And we're also joined by Kezia on the back end here today, who is going to be supporting with Q&A. So if you do have any questions at all during the webinar, please do drop those in the questions tab on the bottom right. And then just a couple other pointers in Livestorm here. Keep letting us know where you're tuning in from, the chat, or share any comments during the webinar there. We do have 2 polls coming today, so that'll be under the polls tab on the bottom right. You can share your emoji reactions with us with that react button on the bottom middle there, and the help button. So if you have any audio or video issues throughout, you can click that button for 4 simple steps to take. Great, everyone's testing out the emojis. I love it. Okay, so we'll kick things off today with a poll, actually. I will go ahead and launch that under our polls tab now. And we'll get everyone to head on over and submit your vote. We'd love to know, have you ever used FME Flow automations? It'd be good to get an idea of everyone's experience level before we get started here today. Give everyone a moment. It looks like most people have voted actually already. And it looks like actually pretty well spread across the top 3, but the largest majority is I have created basic automation workflows. And then another 30% have never used FME Flow. And then another 20%, I use FME Flow, but have never built an automation. Is that kind of what we would expect here, team, or any thoughts there?
Yeah, no, this is great. Yeah, I think a nice split. And there's also a good chunk of people who have also done some complex automations. So that'll be great. Looking forward to kind of hearing comments about what you're doing in the chat later.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Thanks everyone for voting. At this point, I'll get our presenters to turn off their webcams just to save on some bandwidth here. And I'll pass things over for slide 5 here.
Cool, thanks Elizabeth. So as Elizabeth already said, this webinar today is part of a series. You can check out our previous webinars on workspace parameters in your workflows and automation triggers and actions on our webinar site to catch up. So today we're going to get started with an overview on output attributes and automation parameters, and then we're going to jump into a demo of an automation using those. And we've also thrown in a little bonus demo on an introduction to the split merge block in automations. And then we're going to conclude with using those attributes and parameters that we talked about in an automation app before jumping into Q&A. Automating tasks and workflows in FME Flow has amazing benefits. It saves organizations time and money by helping break down data silos, improve data quality, improve efficiency, and much more. To make the most of automations, you'll want to make use of automation attributes and parameters, which we're going to cover today. So I'll pass it off to Kate to get started.
Awesome, thanks Bailey. All right, so getting started, what are output attributes and automation parameters? So automations allow you to build enterprise integration workflows. So basically, FME Flow can receive messages that are stored in a JSON format from external events. And from here, you can trigger workspaces to be run in real time, processing the information that's stored in these messages. Within automations, we can use output attributes and automation parameters, previously known as output keys and global keys, respectively, for anyone that was using FME prior to our rebrand. So we can use these to pass this information through the various automation components, so triggers, actions, and external actions. The JSON message that's sent is flattened, and the key value pairs are stored in these output attributes or automation parameters and can then be sent downstream to the next component in an automation. For those of you familiar with FME form, output attributes can be thought of similar to data attributes in form, so that they're part of the flow of event data through the automation. Similarly, you can think of automation parameters as similar to user parameters in that they're user-defined values that can be used throughout an automation in the various components. So there's several types of these output attributes and automation parameters that can be used when building your automation. We're going to go ahead and we're going to look at several of the different types today to get a better sense of what they are and why you might choose to use them in an automation. In general, output attributes are attributes that are available to use from a port on an automation component. The values are defined at runtime based on the incoming event. Output attributes can be categorized into 4 main types: event, custom, manual, and the automation writer. So first up, we're going to look at event attributes. So these are predefined output attributes specific to the trigger, action, or external action type that can be used to create dynamic workflows capable of processing event information in real time. So let's put this into an example to make it make a little bit more sense. So say we're looking at the resource or network directory watch trigger. So this trigger allows us to watch a directory, and if it's triggered, the JSON message will contain the change that took place. So whether files were created, modified, deleted. We can also get the file path and the file root name. This information will pass in the JSON message where it's flattened to make the key value pairs specific to that trigger. So we can get the file.event path, the file.path, and so on. These event attributes can then be inserted downstream within the automation to process the value in real time. So if we stick with this example, what this basically means is that the file path can be used as the source data set in a workspace, allowing data to be fetched and processed immediately as it becomes available without any manual intervention. Next up, we have custom attributes. So these can be defined by the user building the automation, and they can be set to take the value from an existing event attribute or text entry. There's several scenarios and use cases where you might want to use these. So just looking at a couple. Say, for example, you have the same actions in a workflow. These will have the same event attribute name, resulting in upstream values potentially being overwritten. For example, you have 2 run workspace actions in sequence. Only the second job ID will actually be stored in that output JSON message. To work around this, you can create a custom attribute to give the first workspace ID a unique name so that both values remain accessible throughout the workflow. Another use case you might want is if you want to set a downstream parameter to use the value of multiple different upstream attributes. What do I mean by this? Say, for example, you've got your directory watch trigger, but you also have an email trigger. You want FME Flow to process files that have either been uploaded to that directory or attached to an email. Our event attribute names in this case would be a file path for the directory watch and an email attachment for the email trigger. You can create a custom attribute with a common name shared between the 2 trigger types to be assigned to the workspace action downstream. So again, this is just a couple of examples. For those of you who are already using automations or complex automations, if you have other examples of why you might use either custom attributes or any of the other types that we talk about today, please feel free to share it in the chat for others, and maybe we can get back to it at the end of the webinar. Next up, we have manual parameters. So despite being called a parameter, these are indeed a type of output attribute that can be defined manually through the editor or imported from a JSON file when running an automation. Unlike the first two output attributes, that we looked at, manual parameters are only present when a manual trigger is used. Similar to user parameters, they can be configured based on each type that you might use, so text, choice, and so on. And then once configured, they can be useful in testing workflows or creating automation apps that allow for different types of user inputs at workspace runtime. We'll be able to see this in action a little bit more later on when we get to the demos. Moving right along, we then have automation writer attributes. So these only exist on the run workspace action when an automation writer is present. Any other time, you're not going to see them. Basically, these allow you to parse attribute values out of a workspace into a downstream automation action, enabling you to orchestrate data-driven workflows and trigger any number of additional processes. And again, we'll get to see this later on. So shifting gears a little bit, we're going to look at a couple of the parameters that we have. So the first one we have is deployment parameters, which is relatively new to FME Flow. Deployment parameters allow you to define and reuse text string, database connections, and web connection parameters easily in workspaces shared between FME Flow instances. Deployment parameters can be created both in FME Form, Workbench, or FME Flow, but are ultimately stored within FME Flow. An example of these, if you have workspaces uploaded to multiple FME Flow environments, so for example, you've got a test or development environment as well as production, you can use these deployment parameters, which have that text, database, or web connection stored already within it, and you can run those workspaces without having to update the respective parameter values in the automation. So it makes sharing these workflows across multiple environments nice and easy and lets you just get up and going faster. And the final parameter that we're going to look at before we shift gears into our demo is our automation parameters. So these used to be known as the global keys. And unlike the other types of attributes and parameters that we've looked at so far, which are set at the individual component level, so again, your trigger, action, or external action, automation parameters are set for the automation as a whole. What does this mean? This means basically that the value they hold is not dependent on the event at runtime. They can be referenced throughout the entire automation and can be helpful in reducing maintenance efforts. So for example, again, you've got multiple workspaces referencing the same output file, or you want to send multiple emails to the same list of recipients. Rather than setting this on each individual component within the automation, you can use an automation parameter, making updating and setting that value across components quick and easy. So overall, making use of the various output attributes and parameters in your automation is going to give you the power and flexibility to create dynamic workflows. So with that, let's move on to our first demo where we can actually start to see some of these attributes and parameters in action. In this first demonstration, we're going to be using a scenario that some of you may have come across in our knowledge resources. The goal for this scenario is to take US state and break it down into counties and blocks for additional processing and send a single email at the end. Our blocker for this, as I'm sure we've just realized, is that there are lots of different types of output attributes and parameters, and it can be confusing to know when and where to use them. The key for this is going to be to identify and use these attributes and parameters to pass information between workspaces and send those messages downstream. And our final result and how we know we're successful is that we use these attributes and parameters to pass event, feature attribute, user-defined information throughout the automation. And using the split merge block will also allow us to consolidate the results into a single email. So the first step that we need to do for this demo is going to be to set up our trigger. Because we want to be able to run a chain of workspaces on demand and provide the state name to be processed at runtime, the best trigger to use is going to be our manual trigger. If you recall from earlier, the manual trigger can be set up to prompt for a JSON message when that automation is kicked off. However, unlike the other triggers, the manual trigger doesn't have predefined event attributes because FME does not know beforehand what information the incoming message is going to have. So with that, the automation creator must define the event attributes based on a sample JSON message in order to use these values downstream. So the example that we see here on the screen, we're going to be entering a state name. So the JSON string on this slide is the information that we'll be entering into the manual trigger as that sample message. The state will become the automation writer attribute name, and the value will be used in any downstream actions. For this demo, we're going to use the state of Hawaii, but it could be any state, California, New York, anything like that. The second step, once we have the trigger all set up, is to add our workspace actions. In this demo, the workspace contains an automation writer, which is going to add an additional output port and pass one message and associated attribute into the automation for every feature it receives. So in just a moment, I'm going to hand things over to Tim, who's going to take over and show how to set this all up within FME Flow. But one tip that I'd like you to take away as you're watching this is, since parameters are designed to pass information downstream, workspace actions must contain published parameters to accept the attribute or parameter data as inputs. So this means that you may need to build your workflow slightly differently in a way to use those published parameters. So with that, Tim, I'll hand it off to you now to show everyone how this all works.
Awesome. Thanks, Kate. So we'll be just jumping into the demo here now. All right, so I've got my automation canvas open here in FME Flow. So I'll need to start with a trigger, and I'm going to go with the manual trigger. And for the manual trigger, there's only one parameter that requires configuration, and it's this prompt for JSON on trigger parameter. So depending on your workflow, you might just want to run an automation with no additional input required. But in this case, we're going to be providing a value, so we're going to keep this checked. So the next thing I'm going to do is define that manual parameter. So we're going to head over to output attributes, and then I have the option to import parameters from JSON. And this can be helpful if you're planning on entering a large JSON string into your input, because FME will pass the values into parameters for you. But in this case, I only have one value, so I'll manually add it by clicking on Manage here beside Manual Parameters. This opens up the Manual Parameters editor. And then from here, I'll select Text, and then provide a parameter name and prompt. And I'm just going to go with state for both, and then click OK. And under manual parameters, you'll see that I have the state parameter I just created. So after my trigger, I then want to set up a run workspace action. So to do that, I'm going to add an action and connect it to the success port of my trigger. And I'm going to run the process state workspace as my action. Next, I'm going to want to configure the workspace to process the state manual parameter I created. So down below under parameters, you'll see that I have a state published parameter from the workspace in FME form, which shows California. But instead, I want to use the value for my manual parameter. So I'm going to click on the drop-down arrow here, and then select the manual parameters and select the state manual parameter. So now what's going to happen is every time I trigger this automation, whatever value I enter will be the one that's used in this workspace. So once I click apply, you'll notice that there's an additional automation writer output port called county, because that's been added to my run workspace action. And this is because my workspace contains an automation writer. And with this, any attributes that are sent into the automation writer will now be available to use in any downstream actions. So I'm going to quickly go over to FME form to show how this is set up. I've got a creator to kickstart my workspace that passes through an attribute manager transformer, which then passes the name and population attributes into an automation writer. County is the feature type name of the automation writer, and so that's what appears as the name of the automation writer output port in the automation. So for every feature that reaches this automation writer, it's going to submit that feature as an event. So if I have 5 counties in Hawaii, it's going to submit an event 5 times, one for each county. And then I'll also show you user parameters here. So you can see that I've got a state parameter here with the published checkbox selected, and this is what we saw as the parameter in the process state workspace in FME Flow. So I'm going to head back over to FME Flow now. Now I'm going to add another run workspace action onto this county output port. And this time I'm going to process the county using the process county workspace. And then I'm going to select the name as my county parameter. So I'll go to workspace, county, and name. And I want to repeat this process one more time using the process block workspace to divide the counties up into blocks. So go here, go to process block, and then I'll go to workspace, block, and name. And then I'm going to save my automation now and run it. And then I'm going to trigger my automation, and then I'll get a prompt to enter a state name. So I'm going to go with Hawaii here. And then click OK. So what's going to happen in this workflow after I've triggered it is that the workspace is going to submit that state, and it's going to identify the counties. There's 5 states in Hawaii, so it's going to submit 5 process county workflows, 1 for each of the county values, and there's going to be 10 blocks per county, which means I'm actually going to be triggering the workspace or triggering the process block workspace 50 times. So in total from my manual trigger, I'll be submitting 56 workspaces for this event. Yeah, so I'm gonna head back over to the presentation now and go over some key takeaways. So key takeaways for this first section are you can use manual triggers to pass in user-defined messages at runtime as manual parameters. You can use automation writers to pass data downstream from one workspace to another as automation writer parameters. And lastly, every feature that gets passed into an automation writer is submitted as an event. So one feature equals one event. And so next, Elizabeth's just going to run a quick poll here.
Perfect. Yeah, we'll just go to that poll slide. All right, and I'll launch that now. All right, and yeah, our poll is how can we consolidate workspace actions? So 4 different options there. Give everyone a chance to vote. Yeah, and I believe for this one, it's more of a quiz. Is that right, team?
Yeah, that's correct.
All right.
Yeah, we've been dropping some subtle hints throughout the webinar so far.
Awesome. Okay, it looks like we've gotten a good chunk of votes now. The audience is pretty divided between, it looks like the top 2 votes are merge action and split merge block. So I think we can reveal the answer now.
All right, so the answer to this is the split merge block. So yeah, this is what we're going to be using to consolidate actions in a automation. And I'll be covering that just now. Here we go. So the split merge block helps us rethink how attributes are handled in automations. The split merge block works like a bookmark that contains workspaces and changes how your automation behaves. Regardless of the number of jobs inside the split merge block, it's going to output 1 message per input and only contain information for the final job run in the block. So when automation writers are used to run downstream workspaces, these job requests can vastly increase based on the number of output features from the previous workspace. So for example, let's imagine we didn't have the split merge block in, and we had an automation that starts with an event trigger that generates 1 attribute, which then runs those downstream workspaces. If the process state workspace outputs 10 counties and the process county workspace outputs 20 blocks per county, that means the process block workspace at the end is going to be running 200 times. And then if we tried to add an email action without the split merge block, we'd be sending 200 emails. And that's definitely not what we want. But by containing these workspaces in a split merge block, there is only going to be 1 output message. So what does the split merge block have to do with attributes? We're using attributes from an automation writers to control dozens of job requests while not compromising downstream actions. And this opens up new opportunities for large and complex workflows built on attributes and automation writers. So next, I'll talk a bit about automation parameters. So with automation parameters, instead of manually entering repetitive parameter values in our automation actions, we're just going to use automation parameters instead. So automation parameters are great for reusable values since they can be used all across an automation. And the attribute value is managed in a single location, which is done through the automation attribute editor, which you can see in the bottom left screenshot here. And you can think of the automation parameter as a global variable, and any parameter value that's used in multiple places is the perfect candidate for an automation parameter, such as email recipients. That way, instead of editing every value across your automation, you just have to update that one value and then you're done. So an extra bit of customization that we're going to add to our demo is by using the text editor with our parameters, because with this function, you can add multiple attributes in a single parameter value. And this can be very useful for concatenating attribute values or creating custom text bodies. When selecting output attributes or parameters, you can use the text editor to select and format the output as you wish. And in this example on the screenshot on the bottom here, we're customizing our email body with event attributes such as the job status, time finished, and the state that we're processing based on the manual trigger. And with the setup, we'll be receiving descriptive and dynamic emails based on attribute values. So I'll show you this in just a second here as we go into the demo. So we're gonna start the second demo. Yeah. So the problem here is that we have a workspace that's going to run 50 times. And I actually want to be receiving one email at the very end and not 50. So the solution to this is the split merge block, which is the gray button here in the automation component menu. And in this workspace, in this, I want to contain all the workspaces I want to run and receive only one output at the very end. So I'm just going to connect the manual trigger to the input of the split merge block so that when the manual trigger runs, it's going to run all the workspaces inside. And when the final job and process block workspace is done, I'll receive a single success message. So now that that's done, I want to add an additional downstream actions. So I want to add the downstream workspace here and an email external action to receive an email notification. I'm going to just paste the email external action here because I've already configured this in the background and I just want to save some time. But looking inside, I've set up a connection to our email server. And I want to be sending an email to myself that's notifying me that the entire automation has been completed successfully. And as I talked about earlier regarding attributes that can be added in the text editor, if I go and open the text editor, you can see here that we have the manual state parameter. And then we're just entering that into our text box by looking through the different options we have access to in the menu on the side. And likewise, we're doing the same customization to our email body. And in this case, we're just notifying the user of which state we have finished processing, as well as the job status. So a quick tip when it comes to customizing your email body or subject is that you have the ability to see all the attributes you have access to by going over to your output attributes. And at the bottom here, you'll see show upstream attributes. So if you turn that on, you'll see that this jumped from 2 to 21. So that's a good central place to look at all the info that's coming into this action that you can use. So now that I've set up our email action and our downstream workspace, I also want to customize our email to our email recipients. So if I wanted to add extra recipients, I don't want to have to manually edit it everywhere it's used. So what I can do is go to the parameter and then click on add to automation parameter here. And then I'm going to create an email to automation parameter using this email as my value. And then you'll see that it's changed and it's become an automation parameter that I can find up in the automation parameter editor. And if I wanted to change that and add an extra email address, I can do that just from this location. And if I wanted to use this automation parameter somewhere else, you just need to click on a drop down arrow beside a parameter and click on automation parameters, and then you'll see the new email to parameter I just made. So now if I ever wanted to change those recipients, I just need to do it once and I don't have to go across an entire automation and change it one by one, which saves a lot of time and also reduces the risk of error. So now our automation is complete, and I'm just gonna want to save this and then hit start to run the automation and then trigger it. And then I'll be prompted to enter a state just like before, and I'm going to enter in Hawaii. And then I'll click OK. And it looks like the automation was successfully triggered. So if I go to my email inbox, I can see that I just received an email. So you can see that the subject was dynamically changed to the state that we processed. If we look at the email body, it shows that we finished processing the state and that it was successful. And that brings us to the end of the demo. And just hop back to slides now. So key takeaways for the second demo. The split merge block allows you to combine messages from multiple jobs into a single final output for the final job in the block. With automation parameters, you can edit a single value and update it globally throughout your automation. And lastly, you can use the text editor to add multiple attributes in a single parameter value. And now I'll pass it on to Bailey, who's going to be going over automation apps.
Thanks, Tim. Okay, so like Tim said, we're going to jump into automation apps, and I'm going to show how those automation attributes and parameters become useful in taking our automations to the next level. Okay, so automation apps allow users to trigger automations with a manual trigger as an app from a web browser. For those that aren't familiar, our FME Flow apps are no-code, completely customizable web apps that are shared out as URLs. With automation apps specifically, manual parameters that we've already seen demoed allow for the users to input and customize the values flowing through the triggered automation. So let's first go over what this demo is going to cover and how we're going to achieve everything. The goal is to allow multiple users to run an automation and pass parameter values to the automation, but that's usually blocked by the difficulty configuring and customizing workflow parameters. And the key here is to leverage manual parameters in automation apps to allow users to trigger automations with custom parameters taken as inputs. Okay, let's jump into the demo. Okay, so you see here I have my automation canvas with the same automation that Tim just built out for us. When I open my manual trigger and go to output attributes, we can see I've got 4 manual parameters set up. I've got the state set up as a choice instead, so I can select the state I want to process, county as a text, and I've also left the default value blank. Block also as text with south as the default value, just for fun here today. And then I'm also going to email myself the results. So we click OK and apply these. And now I'm going to start my automation. So now that my automation's running with the manual trigger, I'm going to go over and start an automation app or create one. Okay, so this is our Create Automation Apps page. I'm going to plug in a name. We're just going to call it Land Areas Processing today for fun. And let's put in a title. Cool. I'll skip description today. And I'm going to, I selected that automation that I've already got running. And here you can see we've got those manual parameters coming through. So I can select defaults here as well. So I've selected Florida, left the others the same. And we can also completely customize these apps. So I'm going to add a browser icon today. And then let's set that. And then I'm also going to add a logo here. As you can see, I'm just dragging and dropping the images to be used in the app. So now that I've got all that done, I can click OK. And my app's been created. I can click on this URL to open the app. And now I can use those manual parameters to run the app. So I'm going to select Hawaii. I'm going to use Honolulu for my county. I'll just leave the block as default for South. Email the results to myself. As you can see, my pictures have come through customizing this app. And then once I hit run here, the automation's been triggered. And so yeah, this has gone through this whole workspace or workflow through the automation, running each workspace and sending out that email at the end. So as you can see, we've finished processing the state of Hawaii this morning with the status of success. And now we'll jump back to the slides, wrap it up with some key takeaways. Okay, manual parameters send values that can be used as input throughout the automation, as we saw with the automation app. And then automation apps also pass those manual parameters to the automation triggered from that app. Sorry, guys, mixed up my points there. You got it, though, I'm pretty sure. And yeah, to wrap this up, I'm going to pass it back to Elizabeth to cover some resources.
Awesome. Thanks, Bailey. All right. Yeah. So resources to get started here today. Get our ebook. We have a short link there if you have yet to check it out. It's a free ebook, Spatial Data for the Enterprise. Our FME Academy and knowledge base as well are great places for learning at your fingertips. There's how-tos and demos and the knowledge base for that area as well. And then lastly, our webinars. So we have quite a few upcoming webinars that you can register for, safe.com/webinars, and then lots of on-demand as well. So if you're looking for a specific topic, definitely encourage you to use that search bar. And that will help you, search through our hundreds of on-demand webinars. All right, and next steps, contact us if you have anything you'd like to chat about, data, info@safe.com. And our FME Accelerator course, if you're just getting started with FME, it's a great place. It's a 90-minute course free of charge. And then lastly, our community badge code. So I'll drop that code in the chat in just a minute here. And just to note as well, if you haven't yet checked out our community, we encourage you to do so. It's a great place to network with other users alike. And also get any advice or questions answered. And with that, I will get our presenters to turn back on their webcams and we can take a look at the Q&A together. A lot of great questions that came in today. So thanks everyone for dropping those in as we went. Kezia, feel free if you'd like to join us on stage. You're welcome to as well, but no pressure. Any questions here that we might want to get started with, team?
I think one good one that was there is basically, where does this information go after you run these jobs? And in the example that, Tim took us through. We opted to send it to an email, but you could alternatively have your data upload to a directory. You could send it somewhere else through a webhook or a trigger. Basically, kind of wherever you need it to go, you can do. So you've got lots of options there within the automations.
Another one that would be good to cover is the FME Flow services, which can be used in an automation app. And yeah, it is the job submitter service, as that's the same that's being used in the actual automation. If you want to use the data streaming or data download, those are with the workspace apps. And yeah, it'd be kind of tricky to implement different services and have data download and streaming with running multiple different workspaces and automation apps. But you can also pull that data out at the end using our external actions.
Awesome. Yeah, it looks like we got to most questions actually too. Thank you, Kezia, for all your work on that.
No worries. I think there was a good question from Michelle Knight about the output port for the automations writer. And I'm not sure which one she was testing on her end, but just to reiterate on the demos, if you see an extra port on the action, it could be the success port, fail port, and then additional county port or whatever you would like to author it to. You just need to author that in FME Workbench, add that automation writer, and you'll see that extra output port in the automation canvas.
And then another good question is the ability to use location as an input with the manual parameters. And yes, you can absolutely send in geometry coordinates like any other parameters.
A couple other new questions that have come in. Do we want to pick one of those out?
Yeah, we can tackle this one about, where you see the results of the workspace. So again, this can be done a few different ways. We got an email. When you customize that email, you can choose to have the job log attached to it. And this is useful both for success and for failures as well. So that way you can see very quickly without having to go into FME Flow to go and look at that job log. You can get it sent right to you through that email. Alternatively, again, if you're in the FME Flow UI, you can go to that job section and look at the respective log for that job. So hopefully that answers that question.
Just going to answer this one really quick from Alan about triggering custom script on FME Flow. So you would need to author this in FME Workbench using the Python caller or maybe some startup or shutdown scripts in FME Workbench. And once that's set up, then you can publish it to FME Flow and trigger that workspace on FME Flow like that. And similarly with the custom app, I think you would need to author that first in FME Workbench and FME Form, and then bring that into FME Flow to automate.
All right, well, the team's picking up the next question. I'll just mention as well, if you do think of any other questions after the webinar, yeah, definitely feel free to reach out to us, info@safe.com, and we'll stay online. I'm sure a few minutes longer, at least until the 9 a.m. mark if we wrap up early, just in case there's any other questions that might come in.
There's a question about needing to create folders at runtime. So yeah, the best way to do this would be through FME Form. You'd have to author this in Workspace and then publish it to Flow to automate it. Running activities.
Yeah, Tim's got a great question here about, is there a centralized tool to monitor all running activities within FME Flow? And yeah, you've got different options. Again, that jobs section within the UI, you can see everything that's running, whether it's completed, queued, or currently running. We also have the REST API where you can monitor things as well. You can set up things like, topic monitoring within the automation, subscriptions, that sort of thing. But yeah, so you've definitely got options just depending on what it is you want to do.
Awesome. It looks like so far we've gotten to all the questions. Any others that we want to highlight before we wrap up, team?
I think one thing that's cool to mention is seeing how many events are triggered in automations. I saw a question come in on that, and I believe Kezia answered it. But yeah, in the newer versions of FME Flow, you can actually see the event counts between the workspace actions and triggers and external actions in your automation, which is pretty awesome and fun to see and helps with understanding how your workflow is going.
All right. Any other
And then,
questions?
yeah, another question just came in with the split merge block. So with the split merge block, it waits for all the messages from every action running to merge together before continuing on the workflow. So as the data was passed through each workspace and then to the split merge block, it's not just the data from the last workspace coming out, it's like all combined, and then it waits rather than triggering the workspace action we had after the split merge block. Every message, it consolidates them all together. If that makes sense, hopefully it does.
Yeah, just to kind of add on to that, like that's kind of what makes the split merge block a great tool, because rather than, you know, sending off, I believe Tim had mentioned, you know, 56 plus jobs, which ultimately emails. I don't think anyone wants to get 56 emails all in one go. So being able to, yeah, use that split merge block to hold everything together, like Bailey said, and then send it at the end to send just that single message is great.
Awesome. All right, yeah, so like I mentioned, folks, if you do have another question that comes to mind, we'll stay online for a few minutes longer here. But yeah, I'll go ahead and wrap us up here. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. And to all of our presenters here today, I know this was Bailey's second webinar and yeah, potentially Kate and Tim's first with our company. So big congratulations to them and all the work they did in preparing this content for us here today. And Kezia, thank you so much for your help with Q&A as well. We hope you all have a great rest of your day. And if you do have a brief moment to fill out our webinar survey, it's just one mandatory multiple choice question. We really appreciate any feedback to help us improve our webinars. Thanks so much again, everyone, and hope you, all have a good day ahead. Bye for now.
Thanks, everyone.